that focuses on regulations. After having opened workshops on eyewear as accessories, I'd like to remind you that glasses is also an individual protective device or equipment. It's a medical device, and unlike other fashion accessories, has a very important medical function. And I also would like to remember you that as president of ANFAO, manufacturers have always paid great attention to the quality of products, to the compliance with regulations. That's why we wanted to establish Centrottica, that is a certification institution that has participation in ANFAO and could actually be credited at a national and international level. I often participate in meetings of Euroma, that is the institution that combines all associations of eyewear at a European level, and Certoptica is recognized as a certification institution with a national and international significance. I also would like to thank the entire organization for their valid and effective work, for the image we are gaining in Europe, for the respect of regulations, and for their capability in proposing new norms. And I would like to thank all the technical committee of ANFAO that are hosted within Certotica, and in particular the president, Enrico Torne. And I'd like to then give the floor for the presentation of regulations with regard to individual protective equipment directive. Thank you, President Marcolin. Thank you for your support in all these years. He has always been very close to our institution, and indeed a new institution has started. That's why I wanted Engineer Morandin from Dolomiti Cert and the Engineer Dr. Somarive of Certoptica, because when we won't be able to provide all the explanations today, you may then contact them and they can give you further clarifications and information after the publication of the regulations. I'd like to also thank the young member of the European Commission and in charge of the technical committee for the implementation of the Directive 89686. I'd like to thank him because he's young, because he's from Venice. He was born in Venice. So it is a privilege for us to have him here as a guest for the second time, and he promised me that he will come for a third time after the publication of these regulations, and we will organize this meeting in Longarone that will become the permanent center for European Commission of the PPE for eyewear, but also for the sports sector and also from altitude. So he got a degree in Padua, and he has been trained in various institutions and has been part of the European Agency for Chemical Substances, you know, the famous REACH, that of course concerns us a lot, but is an active member, and he can help us to simplify procedures. And I'd like to thank Marcolin, the president, because he indeed committed himself to try and reduce these administrative commitments so that these obligations should be simplified in order to guarantee the international scope of products. This is the purpose of institutions such as ours that have to be quite quick and effective and support the companies. So I have presented Niccolò Costantini. We have 1 hour time for the presentation, and then at 4 o'clock he has to leave to Brussels. So I hope we will be able in this short period of time to then be better informed and to be then more prepared to answer questions. Questions you may also pose to the European Commissioner that is in charge of this directive, but there will be an additional appointment in spring. So I leave the floor to you, Niccolò Costantini. Thank you, Director, thank you, President. I can also use this mic for the translation. Good afternoon to everybody. I thank you for being here. I work for the General Direction for Industries and Enterprises. So I deal with the new regulations for the PPE that will replace the Directive 686, that is the current regulations for the manufacturing and marketing of personal protective equipment, including eyewear. There is the translation in English, so I will make my presentation in Italian, but you may ask questions both in English or in Italian. So let's start with the definition of individual protective equipment, meaning those equipment or devices worn or kept by a person or held by a person to be protected by one or more risks, both for private use and professional use. You may have different products, both for free time and both for safety on the workplace. And these products may have a different complexity. They could be also very simple, such as ear. You see ear tips, or you may have respiratory masks, long or short range products, different complexity, but they're all within this definition of personal protective equipment. The first question could be, was it necessary to change the regulation for personal protective equipment? So the current regulation that, as said, dates back to 1979, that became in force starting from 1st July 1992, was a success. It was quite satisfactory to create a single market, a market of safer products, and to have a free circulation of these products within the European market. But in this period, then there was the need to change or update certain aspects. That's why certain amendments were required, and they emerged as indeed necessary. Another aspect that we should consider is that in 2008 there was a decision from the European Commission, the new legislative framework, with regard to the commercialization of products. And this means that also products of various categories will follow a similar process and pathway, with the purpose to make it easier for those working in the field with regard to the operational part of the market. So if the manufacturer also manufactures additional products apart from individual protective equipment, so that manufacturer will follow similar regulations, and this has the purpose to make it easier and more flexible for the manufacturers to market their products. So current directive that will soon become superseded is a directive that required a national implementation, so it had to be indeed implemented at a national way. And when the directive was in force, there were either 12 or 15 member states, more or less half the current number of member states of the European Union. That's why it's understandable that with the increase of member states, the directive became more complex. But the advantage is that the current directive is directly enforced without having to be, have such as local gold plating. So, I mean, it's not necessary to include other aspects in the national enforcement decree. So, with this regard, there is still a complete harmonization, and indeed the same requirements had to be respected also with the local transport directive. So it was thought that this new directive would be the most suitable tool, and it is not in conflict, so that the European Union actually takes charge of certain duties only when these duties cannot be taken charge of by other institutions and countries. So the most significant changes that we will deal with in detail concern respect to the regulations compared to the previous regulation. First of all, the field of application. So the products that are included in the regulations compared to the products covered by the directive. There are still the three categories: minimum slight risk, category 1, medium risk, second category, and severe risk, third category. So some risks that were not into category 3 are now in the third category. And then we have the procedures for compliance assessment to verify that the product complies with the directive, and in this case with the regulations. The procedures will be modified, and another important aspect is the limitation of the validity of certificates, whereas in current directive, a certificate could be valid for a known definite period of time. Now there will be an expiration. Then documentary requirements, meaning which documents to be kept by the manufacturer, and what kind of form these documents should have, and how long these documents should be maintained. Other changes that are less significant concerns essential requirements. And then the additional point is alignment with the decision of the new legislative framework, the decision 768/2008. This is an important concept to be kept in mind. So starting with the first change, the first amendment, that is to say the field of application. So which products are considered to be PPE according to the regulations? The main change is the inclusion into PPE those products used against the heat, meaning oven gloves for domestic use. So whereas in the past PPE such as oven gloves were considered within the field of application of the directive only if they were used in a professional field, but now, since the risk is the same, because you can get burned either if you are at home or working at a restaurant, then these products are included into the PPE, because there were situations in which those products for private use were not providing the required, the expected protection as demanded by the consumers. And in some cases, there were several thousands, millions of damages for these. So with regard to other exclusions of the field of application are maintained and specified where necessary, and this concerns the PPE covered by other agreements, such as the agreement of the United Nations for Europe, and we are talking about helmets for motorbikes or for eye protection for motorbikes, and also other devices used on aircrafts or on ships and vessels. Another aspect that was implicitly present also in the current directive was the remote sale. And in the 90s, the remote selling was not so widespread and popular, but now it is. And so the regulation clarifies that also remote selling is included, because this is indeed the same as selling in a shop. The same obligations are required and the same rights for consumers. Then dealing with the second change, that of categories of risk. These are identified in Appendix 1, and whereas in the current directive, the classification of various risks includes a mixture of activities and risks, in the new regulations, the classification is mainly based on risks, meaning minimum risks and risks with very severe consequences. And then there is here a brief overview of the risk added to very severe risks that were before considered in Category 2, and in some cases also in Category 1. But the PPE that protect against droning and then cuts from saws or chain or other high-pressure jets or blemishes from bullets or from knives or for harmful noise. And in order to modify the category of risk towards upper category or towards lower categories, there is a simplified procedures through a delegated act for a reclassification on the part of the European Commission, considering the opinions of the member states and, of course, scientific evidence. This is a fact that is considered essential and necessary based on previous experience with the previous directive. So new risks have been identified, new severe risks have been identified since the time when the first directive was introduced, but these severe risks could not be part of the third category because we didn't have this instrument for reclassification, because the reclassification would have required a complete revision of the directive. So a greater flexibility in order to be up to date with scientific discoveries, in order to be sure that the risk classification is in line with the times. The procedures for compliance evaluation depend on the risk category of the PPE. So the lower the risk or the less severe the risk from which you get protection with the PPE, so the less stringent is the procedure for the evaluation. These procedures for the compliance evaluation are based on the decision 768. There are certain standard forms that it's like a toolkit box where you can get the most useful tools to actually create your legislative instrument. And in this case, with Form A for the PPE Category 1, and for Category 2, you have the Form B. That is the European Union examination of the type, plus internal control of manufacture with Form C, whereas for higher risk categories, you have to add, in addition to what is required for second category, you also have the quality control. And for those who know these forms, modifications are quite limited with respect to current situation. And that was the purpose, to simplify the procedures, because the current compliance verification procedures are still valid, and so we shouldn't have too many changes in order to have a not too traumatic a transition. So there are some changes for the compliance checks, but this is more in line with standard forms in order not to affect activities and the relationships between the manufacturers and the notifying entities. So before it was green and now it's red, so this means that it might not be so well accepted, meaning that the period of validity of the certificate cannot be longer than 5 years, as specified in paragraph 6.1. And this change is due to one of the problems mentioned before, concerning aspects that had to be corrected as it has been experienced in the past, meaning that if you have a validity that is not limited in time, it might be that you have products placed on the market that are compliant with the rules and standards in a certain moment, but they could be stayed on, they could be remained in the market when the state of the art has changed and the quality has become higher, and you might have undesired effects for those who invest a lot in research and development, and of course will have more expensive products compared to those products that were checked 10 years before. So having said this, although we are aware that this aspect causes more cost to manufacturers, but as said, our goal is to try to find a compromise among various aspects and interests. So in case the change of the product has not taken place, meaning at the end of the validity of the certificate, after 5 years, a few months before the expiration of the certificate, so if the product has not been changed yet and the state of the art has remained the same, then in that case there is a simplified procedure to renew the certificate, and so no new tests will be requested by the institution for the products to be recertified, but this would be just a documentary control, and the cost of the procedure would be proportionate to the activity actually carried out. So if the product has changed, tests have to be repeated, but if the product remains the same, because it may be that certain products have life cycles longer than 5 years, in that case this can be done without excessive charges. And for those certificates presently issued and related to products that are on the market with a non-definite duration, so among the transitory regulations, there will have then an entry into force from the entry into force of the official gazette that will remain in force for additional 7 years. So when should the regulations be implemented and enter into force? Well, in January it was approved by the Council with a majority of votes at the European Parliament. So the legislative pathway has been completed. The formal signature of the regulations will come in March and April, and the publication in the European Official Gazette will be in spring, so before May and June. This is what we expect to happen, but we will see then which are the other states and which would be the transitional period for the various aspects of the regulation. Another significant change with respect to the current directive concerns the documentary requirements for economic operators, and this comes from the decision of the new legislative framework of 2008. And this concerns all economic operators, so the commissioners, the manufacturers, the agents and distributors, and the manufacturer has to prepare the technical documentation with contents specified in Annex 3. And the more complete the documentation compared to the previous documentation, so the clearer it is what the manufacturer has to indicate in technical documentation. Another significant amendment has been that the manufacturer has to supply the certificate of compliance together with the PPE, or they may also indicate a link where the declaration of conformity may be indeed read. This additional obligation, that is a charge for manufacturer, is due to problems that were identified, meaning finding the declaration of conformity of the manufacturers when necessary. And sometimes it was difficult to find them, and in spite of that, in spite of the fact that the manufacturers have the obligation to provide the declaration of conformity if required. Since the system did not work correctly, the solution has been to create a greater obligation for manufacturers, although they could choose either to provide the declaration of conformity with the product, or they could provide a link. So a copy of the declaration of conformity and the copy of technical documentation have to be kept until 10 years after the marketing of the equipment. And so meaning the last date of marketing of the last product. So from that date, the documentation has to be available for as many as 10 years. And then the manufacturers have to prepare the necessary procedures so that the mass production continues to be in conformity with the PPE regulations. So all products must be indeed compliant. With regard to the alignment with the decision 768 concerning the new legislative framework, the obligations of economic operators. So the second bullet, we saw it already. So the obligations for manufacturers and agents, importers and distributors. And with regard to the obligations related to the notification of assessment institutions for the conformity, then we have the forms for the procedures of conformity evaluations. We have seen that, and they are not very different from those available with the current directive. And then definition included in section 3 of the regulations is very important, because you have all the definitions of economic operator, placement on the market, and so on, in order to have a very harmonized system. So, and the same definition of manufacturers, regardless of the products that are manufactured. Then the aspect of alignment that have not covered with this, you see the notification of the institutions of conformity evaluation, so the notified organisms, and before the placement on the market of this equipment, there are certain requirements for the notification, so the national authorities in charge of notification to the notified organs. So this is in line with the harmonization requirements. And an aspect that I'd like you to focus on is indeed the contestation, the objection against the competence of notified organs. One of the difficult aspects is that not all notified institutions necessarily have the same level of quality or the same level of rigidity in performing tests and examinations. So there might be cases in which a manufacturer decides to go to, so to say, softer notified organs in order to have their product certified, because they might have problems with other notified organs. And so this may have an effect also on cost, because notified institutions doing tests in 4 months will have then a higher cost than those making the test in 1 month. So the fact is that there is this possibility that in case the Commission verifies or is aware or has a doubt that a certain notified organ does not satisfy the requirements in order to be such an authority, may then implement an act to remove the notification from such institution. So this might be an extreme solution, but this is something that is contemplated by the new regulations, so that notified institutions may not act as a notified institution any longer based on a decision of the Commission. Whereas usually these notified institutions are notified by the local authorities. And this has the goal to solve a problem identified with the current directive.
No, quella prima. L'ultima.
So the last slide regards the final and transitory provisions. So what to expect in terms of us working with this new regulation. So today's directive will be replaced by this regulation, but of course there will be some transitory provisions that are provided for in Article 47 in terms of signing and publication. We think around spring, so in springtime, and then the regulation will be enforced 20 days after this publication date. So it could be, in June, but this doesn't mean that it will be applicable. It will be applicable 2 years after its entrance into force. So if it is 21st of June 2016 that it enters into force, then it will be applied after 2 years. So products can be then sold on the market according to today's directive for 2 more years. And then there will be one further year, so a third year of transition. Even though the old directive is not in force anymore, it will still be possible to sell on the market products that were manufactured according to today's directive for a further year. So the transition period will be in total 3 years. In terms of conformity certificates that were released according to today's directive with no deadline will still be valid for 7 years from the entrance into force. In June 2016, for example, they will still be valid for further 7 years up to 2023. So further 7 years from the entrance into force and 5 years after the application. So the products that were manufactured according to today's, or actually today's, certified according to today's directive, could still be sold. And then if some member states are ready to certify and notify the bodies according to the new regulation, and the notified bodies are ready to respect the requirements in this new regulation, possible for member states to start making modification and changes in these bodies within the next 6 months from its entrance into force. This to avoid accumulation of activities that will have to be, carried out so that everything will run smooth up to the application date. So if some notified bodies and some member states are ready earlier, they can do it and they can start doing it. In terms of sanctions, they're up to the member states, and they will be communicated to Commission within 1 month before the application. So 1 month before the application of the regulation. So it is very important that we are ready to get ready for it. But of course, this regulation still has not been published, and if someone is telling you you have to start recertifying all your products, well, that's a little bit too early, because you've seen that we have a transition period that is being envisaged, and so yes, it's important to get ready, but for the time being, concrete actions at very short time are not required. It's more a preparatory work to fulfill with the new framework. So the old directive 1989 has had quite a long life. I don't know whether this new regulation will last for 25 years, but of course it is worthwhile investing resources to be aware of what will be the novelties and requirements to continue and be on the market and exploit the market, being compliant with the new regulation. Well, that's it with my presentation. I was actually quicker than I expected, and this might leave us more room for questions. I see that some of you have the text of this new regulation, so the draft of it, to say if you have questions, specific questions on some articles, we can project the text because I have it in my slides. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Costantini. There are still open issues, certainly, so let's start with the gentleman over there. If you can also introduce yourself, please, because we need to document the work. And so you need to take note of who's participating in the debate as well. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Engineer Radice, and I deal mainly with medical devices and also PPEs if connected to medical devices. My question is a text that we find is can it be considered the valid sort of base, or should we expect to put the official version and published version? Thank you very much. Well, the text you're referring to, dating back to 2014, is the original proposal that actually was the best as possible, but then it has been further improved. Actually, it was further improved during negotiations with the European Council and European Parliament. So on the website of the European Union, will find of Commission, you will find this proposal, but this is not the text that was voted and approved. And here you see this is of the Council, but the one of the Parliament is the same. It includes some changes. This is 28th of January 2016, the date of this document, of this version. I can send you the link, but you can find it in the Parliament website and also with the Council of Europe website. So this is the text that will reasonably enough be the published one. Of course, the certainty will be there only when the text is published, but the plenary has voted, and also the ministers have voted, so, but not on the 2014 text. This one, the new version. Changes are in bold and some parts have been deleted, and this is highlighted in this text that I'm showing you on the slide. If you have questions, of course. Good morning. My name is Ceruti, Technical Director of Strot. I have a hands-on approach question. When the new regulation enters into force, the customer that bought the PPE that were manufactured with according to the old directive, can they still be used? Well, the person that bought PPEs that were legally placed on the market, of course I'm not a lawyer, but the principle is a PPE is any product, if it is marketed and it is applied was legally put on the market according to the regulations that were valid, norms and regulations or directives that were valid when they were launched. It's not that they have to throw away all these PPEs. No, of course, already now the standard maybe changes, and like a helmet that was launched in 1985 will be different from the one that is launched on the market in 2010 with respect to the one that was launched in 1995, for example. So if a product was legally put on the market, it's not that you have to withdraw them all PPEs. Have I answered your question? Yeah, because normally users say if the directive is not anymore valid, I cannot use these PPEs anymore. This is maybe what they could, say to you. From engineer to engineer, still I hear about directives, norms and regulations as it being the same thing. Please tell me what is a norm, a directive, a regulation. It's not that it's not anymore compliant when the regulation comes out or is put into force. Well, this regulation is this new regulation that will be applicable starting from 2018. The directive is the Directive of 1989 that will be valid till 2018. The norm is more a general term to say the directive is one thing, then we have the new regulation. The standard is a totally different thing that is not part of the directive, but being quoted in the official journal employs for conformity in terms of safety, but the standard is created by standardization bodies that are not part of the European Commission, that are independent bodies, and the European Commission or the services of the European Commission check and make sure that the standards that are being proposed by CENELEC or other bodies in Europe are compliant with the provisions of the norm in force, being it the directive or the new regulation. I also would like to underline that the use of PPEs, and in particular the use of PPEs at the working place, and the protection of workers at the working place with PPEs, is also subject to a further directive, European directive, which concerns health and safety at the working place. And this directive entails risk analysis and the obligation on the part of the employer to provide his workers with PPEs that are suitable for the risk the worker underlies. So this is actually a different story, the use of PPEs at the working place. Here we're talking about the manufacturing, so the manufacturing process for PPEs that must then have certain characteristics to comply with the requirements. So it's actually two separate aspects, even though they are close to one another. Good morning, Barbara Pengo Safilo. You were mentioning that a conformity certificate is valid for 7 years after its publication on the official journal. But in terms of the first category piece of equipment that only have a declaration of conformity, is still 7 years the period for them, or something different? Well, please allow me to explain that certificates are actually not published in the official journal. So certificates are not published. Certificates are released by notified bodies to manufacturers for their PPE. Now, here, these are different articles. If we can maybe find Article 47 to try and give an answer to your question with more details. So here we are. So the different those released for category 2 and 3. It's valid, and then you see 7 years from the entrance into force of the regulation. So we're talking about certificates that were released by notified bodies, so not necessarily applicable to PPEs of category 1. And this limitation, this new limitation in terms of validity, so the 5-year validity, is in Annex 5, which deals with the EC type examination, which is not envisaged for category 1 PPEs. So all in all, a declaration of conformity that is provided for by a manufacturer still has no deadline. So this declaration has no deadline, if I have understood correctly. Well, yes, but this PPE, independently from its category, must be state-of-the-art, cutting edge. This sort of obligation for the manufacturer to comply with the essential requisites is still there, this obligation, and with the evolution of technology and science and of course of standards, then this product maybe of category 1 that has not been changed for 20 years, we might have some doubts in the fact that it's still state-of-the-art.
Buonasera.
Good evening, Pietro Zanetti, Phoenix Park. We have some pictograms. Are these pictograms still the same, or will they be changed? As for pictograms, they are not harmonized, so what is not harmonized is free. Whereas, whereas we are continuing on in terms of harmonization for the labeling and packaging of chemical substances, and this has changed with the new regulations on chemical substances. A similar process is not taking place for PPEs, is not started, is not envisaged at short term. So pictograms are not present in the text, are not mentioned in the text. The situation will not change. It was not in the directive and still won't be in the regulation. I have a question, Somariva Sertotica. Two different interpretations in terms of the Declaration of Conformity. This Declaration of Conformity, is it for single product, or could it cover a family of products? The Declaration of Conformity has envisaged in the new regulation should accompany every single product. So the Declaration of Conformity is for the single product. If we can go down to Annex 10, we will see the model, the form. So actually, it's Annex 9. So here you see this Declaration of Conformity, the number, the first point, number of product on the series batch. So maybe not going down to the single product, but at least at batch level. So a Declaration of Conformity that would cover one batch. If there is a defect in the batch, production batch, then this Declaration of Conformity, is limited to the batch. Yeah, but if I have a model of sunglasses of a specific brand and then I create different versions for the same brand, I will have to release different declarations of conformity because there are different codes, SKUs. So, yeah. Yeah, I think, your question already includes the answer. If I have 3 or 10 different types of sunglasses, one with squared frame or the other one with the round rim. So they will all need different declaration of conformity. Yeah, because sometimes you have this tendency to include in the declaration of conformity the different codes, to group different codes in one declaration of conformity. Of course, this regulation is not specifying this in such a detail, but of course, not necessarily we will sort of go with the loop to find the missing code. But if the product have similar categories. As you see, the product point 4 is a color picture is also to be provided. So, of course, you will need then 4 different descriptions of the product. If one declaration of conformity is covering 4 products, you will have to add the descriptions of the 4 of them. And so, you know, one declaration covering more products, but at a limit. But if we have a picture and a clear description of the product, of all the products, and also each product must be identified, and anyhow you will have to have this batch ID. So product and batch, production batch. So this document will be 10 times longer for 10 products than for one product. Yeah, it could be, but then, you know, it is feasible, yeah, of course. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't include more products in one declaration. This, if I were a manufacturer, of course. For such questions, however, or for any other doubts that you might have regarding specific aspects of the regulation, I will try and provide you an answer here during this meeting. If not possible, I invite you to write to me. There is an email address, my email address. So please sort of group all your doubts and questions, and maybe let's try and group the frequently asked questions, the frequent doubts in terms of the application of the regulation. Please send them to the Commission services, because it is our intention before the regulation is applicable, that in these 2 years we will try and cover up as many doubts and questions and FAQs that we have, that you might have. Of course, we also want to publish as soon as possible, before the new regulation becomes applicable. We would like to publish the new guidelines, because you know, the new guidelines for the Directive were published last year. We as soon as possible will also start working at the guidelines for the regulation. So first of all, we would like to provide you with answers on the more urgent doubts and questions, and also some guidelines for you for proper interpretation and analysis of the different articles in the regulation. Regarding this declaration of conformity, is there sort of a model, a form? This Annex 10 or 9, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, if we would look at the articles of the regulation regarding the declaration of conformity, you will have sort of the answer. I mean, they explain to you which information is to be included in the declaration of conformity. So the regulation is telling you what information is needed and must be included in the declaration of conformity. If there are no further questions, I think that our session on this new regulation is over. I would like to restate once again that we will organize another meeting at Toptica in May, June on new guidelines that will be published. So we will review the guidelines and explain them to you for those that would like to sort of participate in this meeting in May, June, when probably the regulation will enter into force. So thank you very much to Mr. Costantini, and I would like to ask him once again to before the beginning of the summer. So if you can be back and participate also in this meeting I have just announced. Well, if possible, certainly, I'll be pleased because I was in Finland and then next week I'll go to Lapland. So for those that are active in this field, is certainly an important regulation. So we do have an interest throughout Europe. So if my agenda allows me, certainly I will be present. And when we talk about single market, it's not just the European Union, but we talk about also Europe that includes Turkey and Switzerland, because this regulation will allow for free circulation of products on a wider area than just the 28 member state Europe. Also, we need to add that in this field, as in many other fields, the European industry is the most advanced in the world, and so the weight and importance of our standards goes certainly beyond the borders of Europe. Thank you very much for your attention.